Welcome back guys for the final part of the Cold Steel 1 and 2 community ranking. With the shareholder meeting close at hand, I decided to put the pedal to the metal this week and attempted to get the final 20 characters compiled into one video. So I'll probably be terse with some of the entries, but that's purely because I want to make sure the length doesn't get too out of hand. Without further ado, let's see who makes up our top 20. Starting us off at number 20, it's the head knight of the Stahlritter, Duvalie, though calling her head knight is a bit of a stretch based on her mannerisms. I like Duvalie quite a lot actually, an antagonist but not a villain, and her quirkiness and ditziness is sort of charming and disarming given that she's a high-ranking officer in Ouroboros. It's clear almost immediately that Duvalie is a groupie for her master, the Steel Maiden. She gushes about her and she'll defend her honour to the last, so there's no doubting her loyalty here. But because of how eccentric and confident she is in her own ability, she has a tendency to flaunt at inopportune moments, before getting her steel keister handed to her. Despite that though, I really like Duvalie's character. I love the little double act she has going with McBurn through Cold Steel 2, and I'm a big fan of how ditzy she is. But don't be fooled by her persona, because she can be quite a threat when she wants to get serious. A solid character overall, and I think top 20 is just about right for her. At number 19, we have the Black Rabbit herself, Altena. Now this was a tough one for me personally, because she's actually one of my favourite characters in the series, but that didn't happen until Cold Steel 3 and beyond. And of course we're basing this purely off of the character's role in the first two games. The issue with Altena in the first half is that she is mired in a deeper mystery that extends past the first two games. Her character is purposely withheld from us because of the future revelations of the arc, so as a result her debut on screen is a bit lackluster. Slightly odd design, I don't get the bunny hoodie guys. Sarky but mostly robotic in terms of dialogue and interesting connection to a member of Class 7 and seemingly unable to think for herself. I will say she gets some points for character development based on her assistance in the divertisement, but unfortunately she does get shafted in Cold Steel 1 and 2. At number 18 we have one of the jewels of the Erebonian Empire. Spoilers, Cedric isn't on this list. It's Elfin Rice Anna. Now Elfin is a strange one for me. She's interesting in that she takes some notable traits from her older brother, mostly because she takes pleasure in teasing those around her. But despite that outward playfulness, she's also a benevolent future ruler. She clearly cares about the people of Erebonia. Even with that though, I personally felt there was something missing with Elfin in the first two games, and I think this quote encapsulates that feeling. Compared to Skye and Chloe, the plot in Cold Steel does her dirty. She is a literal figurehead, and despite her personal agency and desire to do good, the plot just kinda puts her in a box. This is it. We've already met a fantastic princess character from the Skye arc in Chloe. We've journeyed with her, we've seen her struggles and growth, and as a result she didn't really fit into that princess trope we see in many other games. Elfin unfortunately does not escape that. She literally embodies the "your princess is in another castle" line, because she's in a ship. I do like her and I think she's important to the development of other characters like Green, but I don't think she's done justice in these first two games. It's like she's been pigeonholed into a role rather than being allowed to flourish into a compelling character, which I believe she could have done. Overall, still likeable and a good character overall. At number 17, we have potentially the youngest and most energetic member of the Ironbloods, it's Millium. Now unlike most members of Class 7, Millium joins very late on in Cold Steel 1, though we do see her on occasion during Chapter 3 most notably. For being one of the Chancellor's famed children, she definitely doesn't fit the stereotype of what you would expect. She's just an energetic girl who enjoys food and having fun, much to the chagrin of a certain noble. And I'll admit that Millium didn't really hit home for me in the first game because of her shady background, but she became much more endearing come the end of Cold Steel 2, where it appears that her time with Class 7 has visibly changed her. She develops relationships with the members of Class 7 without even realising it, displayed by emotions that she never even knew she had. That alone makes character development her strongest aspect in my mind. Yes, some people can't stand her energy or her addition to Class 7 in the first place, but she's fine in my book. Coming in at number 16, it's Rufus Alberea. Now first off, let's appreciate that this guy could be the face of L'Oreal with those smooth golden locks. Sorry, going off topic. Here we go, have a quote. It's wonderful to have a competent adversary that is smart, capable, and not overtly evil in a JRPG. He carries himself in a way that makes him seem more open and honest towards all he meets while acting as a mastermind behind the scenes. After seeing where they took his character in Cold Steel 2, I ended up liking him even more. I think this quote hits the nail on the head. Rufus is a villain, no doubt, at least from the perspective of Class 7, but he also seems to carry himself with the grace of a true noble. He doesn't seem slimy, if that makes sense. So when you finally see that this upstanding man who even condemned the actions of a fellow noble is actually in league with the Chancellor, it shocked me quite a bit. Like his master, Rufus takes great pleasure in playing the board to perfection, kind of like a protege of the Chancellor, and there's no doubt that he sets up the events of Cold Steel 3 and 4 nicely. A refreshing take on a villain, and I think he's solid throughout the first 2 games. What is it about maids and butlers being badass in these games? A fun character, especially when she knows how to make Elisa tick. I've always loved the apricot jam scene in Cold Steel 1. Yeah, bang on. This was the first scene that came to mind for me when it came to Sharon. It showed the familiarity she has with the youngest daughter of Reinford, and she has a knack of pressing the right buttons, which shows a level of warmth which is nice to see. Now, despite some excellent reveals, in particular her affiliation with Ouroboros as an enforcer, Sharon doesn't get that much in the first 2 games either. She's another late bloomer who gets far more love in the second half of the arc. But unlike many characters who suffer the same ailment, I think Sharon does just fine even in her weaker half. She's likeable, has some great dialogue, I love her design and her mannerisms, and she's got enough to make her a good character overall from those alone. And based on her rank, I think a lot of people agree with that sentiment. Especially Anton. At number 14, we have the Icy Maiden Claire Reveldt. She's so elegant and aesthetically beautiful, but she never went anywhere. She always felt empty as a character, just a piece of eye candy with mysterious allegiances. I don't hate her, but I didn't love her like I expected to. Yeah, I definitely agree with this. Claire has an awesome outward design, there's no doubt about that, and she's clearly a sympathetic individual. We see that come the end of Cold Steel 2. But I'd be lying if I said I cared about her story arc in the first half of Cold Steel. I wouldn't say I disliked her, I'm just indifferent, and that's potentially because a big part of her story is tied to her role as an Ironblood and her reasons for being a part of them. I'll be honest in saying that I don't remember much of Claire's character from the first 2 games. Nothing really stood out to me other than the fact that she's a brilliant tactician and leader of the RMP. Yeah, a bit of a meh character for me personally, but she definitely has her admirers. One of my favourite antagonists in any series ever, has one hell of a presence just by walking into a room. Again, another quote that I can agree with. I firmly believe that without Osborne, the Trails series would not be nearly as engrossing as it is. It's important to have a recurring big bad like him throughout a series as interconnected as this. But of course we're going off track here because we're meant to assess Osborne's role purely in Cold Steel 1 and 2. Now some may look at his story significance as being a bit too high overall, but I would say despite his limited screen time it's a fair reflection of what he does throughout the 2 games. His supposed assassination was the spark for the Civil War, which is the overarching narrative for the first 2 games anyway, and he pretty much orchestrated the downfall of the Noble Alliance before the fighting had even begun. This guy takes 4D chess to another level. He also takes control of the mysterious phantasmal Blaze plan, is the father of the main protagonist, and pretty much blackmails him to be a national hero. So yeah, he's not too likeable, but with his overall aura and central role in the plot, I can understand why he ends up relatively high on the list. A good character for me. Here we go, at number 12 it's the OG character who initially sparked my interest in the Trails series. It's Laura S. Arcade. Before I even knew what Trails was, I had a Sen no Kiseki background on my old computer simply because I liked the way that Laura looked. And when I eventually stumbled on the game by chance, it was pretty obvious that Laura would be the one who caught my attention first. And she definitely did. Laura is my favourite girl of the original Class VII, at least in the first 2 games. I like her diligence, her grace, her ineptness with anything mechanical, but I also get behind the respect she shows to other individuals. And that respect she often shows works very well in the eventual reconciliation with another Class VII member. You have to understand that Laura was brought up by a single parent, a man who just so happens to be one of the strongest in the Empire, and one who is famed for his role as head of the Arcade School. So it's understandable that swordplay, martial arts and honour take a big role in shaping who Laura is. So when she meets someone who embodies the polar opposite of that ideal, it's understandable why she appears to stand off a bit. She's actually disappointed in herself for being unable to see past her own prejudice. That speaks volumes of her character. She is always striving to be better. Some people may see her as a trope, and I can understand that, but because of her strong ties to swordsmanship and how she incorporates it meaningfully into her character, I believe she is a great member of the group overall. And lest we forget the one-shot Laura build which trivialises Cold Steel 2. That was fun. Beautiful girl with a nice personality. She is basically the mother of Class VII who cares for all members, not caring about their backstories or social standing. Unfortunately, the story in Part 1 doesn't give her much time to shine, and in Part 2 it feels like she has to share some time with Celine. Gameplay wise, she is my most used mage, can be devastating to enemy groups, and is definitely waifu material. Yes, I can get behind this. For Cold Steel 1, I feel that Emma is a throwaway. She is given nothing in the first game outside of the ending, and thus I can't understand why her story significance is so high. Now, some people are engrossed in that kind of aspect, they love the mystery, but I personally needed a bit more, especially considering that she was overshadowed by her talking cat when things started to get real. Her role in Cold Steel 2 was better, but again I think she takes a backseat to another witch who takes centre stage, kind of demonstrating an inferiority complex in Emma's character. Despite that though, I do agree that she is very likeable, possibly the most likeable character in Class 7. She's intelligent, empathetic, extremely useful in combat, and it's clear that she doesn't take pleasure in her role as a witch, at least in regards to guiding Reen to become an awakener. If it was my personal list, she would be lower, but I understand why she ends up so high. As much as I would like to explain my position on Eusis, I think I'll leave it to one of you guys this time around. Eusis is great, and honestly could have just as easily have been the protagonist of the whole series with the way his arc goes. He undergoes a lot of turmoil, a lot of change, and develops into a man worthy of the title placed on his shoulders. His dialogue with Marcius is always top notch, and there was always a lot of attention and care shown to him, in particular by the writing. Every single line is bang on. Eusis is a great character. He's actually my favourite member of the original Class 7. Disregarding how he abuses horses and makes them race against motorbikes, the guy potentially comes from the most dysfunctional family in Class 7. Being the bastard son of Duke Alberea, Eusis is consistently fighting an uphill battle for approval. Despite being a noble and having a clear idea of what that title entails, he also respects his father's authority even with the man hating his guts. And that's where the source of Eusis' struggles comes from. His father continually does things that go against what Eusis considers to be the actions of a true noble, but he doesn't want to oppose the man either. It's only once Duke Alberea commits an atrocity against Celtic that he decides to take action, believing his father to be irredeemable at this point. On top of that, he is the other half of one of the best story arcs within Class 7, that being the clashing of ideals between Marcius and himself. While Marcius indeed develops, I would argue that Eusis grows equally as well as his commoner counterpart. He may be a bit pompous at first, but he comes to rely on the members of Class 7 rather than shouldering the burden himself. A show of trust that demonstrates the bonds and growth of Class 7. And overall, I'm glad that he makes it into the top 10. He deserves that at least. Moving on to number 9, we have the student council president who can seemingly do all. It's Toa. Now despite her small stature, Toa shoulders more responsibilities than 5 others combined, and she still manages to complete her tasks with efficiency and quality. And even with the stress that surely comes with that position, she's one of the most approachable characters in the arc. I love how when she takes the mantle of captain on the Courageous, she even gets around to training herself in combat for the benefit and safety of those around her. But my personal favourite moment for Toa will always be the moment at the end of Cold Steel 2 where she demonstrates her big sister tendencies to Reen. It seems at this point that all other members of Class 7 are unaware of how the main protag is feeling, that he is tearing up on the inside because of his failure to save someone dear to them. But Toa recognises it immediately. She becomes the person who accepts all of Reen's grievances, thus allowing him to let go of those bottled emotions. The fact that Toa could see it when no one else could is a great indicator of what makes her character so endearing in the first place. With that in mind, I think her spot at number 9 is just about right for her. Alright, here we go. At number 8, it's Elisa Reinford. Now I think it's fair to say that Elisa is one of the most divisive characters in the series. From what I understand, a lot of the animosity comes from Elisa being seen as a trope and for being heavily implied as the main relationship in a duo of titles where the player is given the choice on who they want to be with. I personally never minded this aspect too much because I didn't really care all that much for the romancing options. I was more intrigued about the character herself, and no doubt I think she had a poor first impression, but I appreciate how she developed over time. Elisa is a more unique character in Class 7 in that she's a commoner, but she comes from a background that suggests she could be a noble. As a result, she never had friends. The commoners felt intimidated by her position and the nobles didn't see her as a person of their ilk. So growing up, Elisa only had her family, which was torn apart because of her mother's actions following the death of her father. It's because of her mother that she becomes alienated and seeks to initially escape her control, before eventually resolving to find a new path for the Reinford group come the end of Cold Steel 2. With all that said, I think Elisa develops very well over the course of the two games. Mechanically savvy, but not to the point where it defines her character, and she's obviously not lacking in kindness either. She just shows it in a different way. I think she's quite plot-centric, has good dialogue overall, and thus I can see why she scored highly across the board. Good character for me. At number 7, we have the Azure Diva and second Anguis of Ouroboros, Vita Clotilde. Now Vita is another one of those enigma characters, you never really know what she's up to. This quote sums her up pretty well. Deep, multi-dimensional, mysterious with a lot of secrets to uncover, and just utterly engaging every time she was on screen, or on air. Her English voice actor was enchanting to boot. Of course, throughout the games, we see her in various instances as the radio host Misty and the famous opera singer Vita, but her real motivation lies in the Phantasmal Blaze plan, being one of the main players who brings about its fruition. However, we discover by the end of Cold Steel 2 that she was not interested in the war or the Infernal Castle, she only cared about the clash between Ashen and Azure, an attempt to prevent the inevitable fate of Erebonia. That alone gives Vita a lot more dimensions below the surface. Her loyalty lies with the Grand Master, but she also wants to prevent any needless suffering, and it sets things up nicely for the second half of the arc. I also like her role as a sort of benchmark that Emma has to measure herself against. It's clear that Vita cares for her younger sister, but her role as an Anguis comes first. Because of the way she pushes Emma's buttons, it provides a key factor for the younger witch's future development. Again, good character, great design, deeply mysterious, and intrinsic to the plot. Number 7 is about where I would expect her. Here we are, the main protag of Cold Steel is up, and it was a cacophony of mixed opinion based on the comments alone. Let's have a look at one. Reen comes off as too much of an anime trope protagonist in the first two games, but he is still very likeable. Not as strong as Estelle or Lloyd right off the gate, but he does have potential to be a very good character depending how they handle him. This seems to be one side of the argument, that Reen is a self-insert generic anime trope. He has the good looks, he has the harem, he has the power, and he's the chosen one in terms of being an awakener, and the centre of Class 7. Now I can say, first of all, that I don't like harem, and it's why the romance options never clicked with me. I much prefer a canon relationship, because then the writers are not handicapped by keeping plot-insensitive details behind a player choice. So the harem protag aspect never bothered me too much, as I placed less importance on it unless it was wantonly thrown in my face. Rather, I tried to assess Reen purely on his trait and what he brings to the table. I feel that some of his dialogue is flip-floppy in that he finds an answer before going back to doubting himself once again, and yes, for me he is the weakest protagonist of the four if we're including Kevin into that mix. But to say that he is an anime trope and disregard everything he goes through is disrespectful to his story. In my opinion, Reen gets beaten around incessantly throughout Cold Steel 1 and 2, more so than any of the other protagonists. He is defined by his empathy. He is a person who puts other people's happiness above his own, and he doesn't care about his own well-being for better or worse. He comes to Thors initially because he doesn't have a path, but also because he doesn't want to be a burden on his parents, who he feels are suffering because of him. That empathy becomes a key trait that surrounds Reen as others around him attempt to drag him out of the stupor that he must do everything alone. And through his time with Class VII, Reen finds that there are others who he can rely on and trust, only for it all to be taken away from him come the end of Cold Steel 2, where he again takes the burden upon himself, fighting Calvard to prevent the suffering of Crossbell. Add on to that everyone leaving him behind, and you've got a guy who ends up at rock bottom come the end of Cold Steel 2, until that much needed final send-off in the epilogue. I like Reen's story. It's a narrative surrounding a guy who is filled with doubt about himself, and even though he doesn't really find himself come the end of Cold Steel 2, the bonds that he and Class VII made over the course of the first two games sets his story arc up very nicely for the second half. Definitely not the best character in Cold Steel 1 and 2, but without a doubt makes it in my personal top 10. Well, this is interesting. Who knew that the Awakener would end up behind his knight? Valamar is so damn awesome. I'm a bit biased to the Divine Knights as I think they're the best thing about the Cold Steel arc as a whole, but that shouldn't take away from the Ashen Knight's credibility. It's because of the reveal of Valamar at the end of Cold Steel 1 that I got the final push that gripped me into the whole series, spurring me on to find the Sky arc, and of course the rest is history. Disregarding Valamar's wingman skills, which are admittedly awful, I'd argue that no one understands Reen better than Valamar considering the connection they share. Their moments together are fleeting, but as the Divine Knight regains his speech, he becomes a reliable and clear guiding voice for his Awakener, especially near the end of Cold Steel 2. He can sense the self-doubt in Reen, and that's why he offers support that only he can give, because he knows exactly how Reen feels. And it's because of this that I feel Valamar and Reen are a true partnership, two individuals who rely on each other. That alone gives him great character development and likability. Of course, being a Divine Knight, his story significance is high, and for me, he has the best design of any character on this list. Ultimate Brobot. At number 4, we have the booze-loving badass instructor of Class 7, Sarah Vallerstein. I would argue that no one could be a better instructor for Class 7 than Sarah. She was exactly what they needed. She provided that balance in giving the students autonomy, but also was using her connections to make sure that they were safe, especially in the first Cold Steel game. It kind of acted like a failsafe if anything went wrong. Tovol being in Berea Heart is a good example here. She may seem irresponsible, but that is far from the case. She is consistently looking out for her hatchlings, but she wants them to soar by their own achievement. In Cold Steel 2, she openly says to them that the responsibility is theirs in regards to their actions during the Civil War. She is simply there as their instructor. Despite that though, she is also willing to take the reins if she feels the situation is beyond her students, the attack on Corellia Fortress being a good example of that, and it's the initiative you would expect from an A-rank bracer. On top of that, she is the best looking human character in the first two games. The gun-sword combo matches her character to a T, embodying power and agility in equal measure. Add on to that her revealed past as a Jaeger, and you've got one of the finest characters of the first two games. Representing the best of the main Class 7 members, it's Fie Clausel. She's not the most crucial character to the story, but she is very important. She has some of the best character developments in the saga, an interesting past that's actually constantly expanding while she's constantly changing for the better as time goes on. Fie is a fan favourite for a myriad of reasons. Gameplay wise, she can effectively break the game as an evasion tank, but a lot of people point to her development over the course of the first two games. In Cold Steel 1 she seems very robotic, efficient even the way she goes about things. As a result, she lacks emotion in a lot of the interactions she has, but throughout the course of the first game you can hear her slowly coming out of her shell, and in Cold Steel 2 she's far more emotional. And I think we have to give props to the voice actor for that. It demonstrates the development of Fi on multiple levels, and we can hear it. Her dialogue is solid in that she's brilliantly sarcastic and blunt at times, and her design is top notch as well. She may not be the most plot centric, but there is lots to love. Top 3 for Fi? I can get behind that. Now, unlike Fi, where I could definitely get behind her ranking, this is one that I have to question. Is Olivert a brilliant character to the series? Yes. Is he a brilliant character in Cold Steel 1 and 2? Debatable. This is another case of Lecter syndrome. The bias surrounding Olivert came into play here. This quote pretty much sums up my thoughts on the matter. He's the one laying the groundwork to allow our heroes to do their heroics, and is constantly working behind the scenes to counter the plans of all of the bad actors at work in Erebonia. Definitely agree that Olivert is strong in story significance. Without him, Class 7 doesn't exist, so you can argue that point. Great dialogue too, explaining his reasoning for the formation of Class 7, and he is undoubtedly likeable. But does Olivert really develop over the course of Cold Steel 1 and 2? Does he really grow more than Marcius, for example? Not in my mind. He's pretty much the same prince who is fighting against the methods of the Chancellor in his own way. Honestly speaking, when I first played Cold Steel 1, which was my first game in the Trail series, he didn't leave much of an impression on me. It was only after playing Sky, Crossbell and all the others that I appreciated his presence more. I've no doubt that there are people who loved his role in Cold Steel 1 and 2 anyway, but regardless, I have to question the validity of this one. Here he is, guys. The best character in Cold Steel 1 and 2 as voted by the community is Crow Armbrust. And honestly, I definitely agree with this one. When I look at all the characters individually, their merits and what they bring to the table, I can't deny that Crow demonstrates them the best. Which is saying something, as I didn't care too much about him the first time I played Cold Steel 2. It was only after my second playthrough that I came to appreciate him. Now, some fans will point to Crow as being a bad person. I would argue he's more of an anti-hero. He's someone who won't let personal relations get in the way of his one true goal, the assassination of Osborne. What I love about Crow's backstory is that it's decidedly simple. Crow even says it himself. It's a typical sob story that you would hear from hundreds of others. Growing up, Crow idolised his grandfather, someone who taught him pretty much everything he knew. When Osborne came along though, his grandfather was no match, and it ended indirectly in his death. Now, this simple backstory may not seem like much on the surface, but it's a brilliant motivation. I dare say there are many individuals who play these games who have at least one person that they idolised while growing up, whether it be a father or an older sibling. For me, that was my dad. I believed that he could do anything while growing up, and I imagine this is how Crow felt about his grandfather. To not only witness that person lose, but to give up as well would tear anyone up, like watching your hero get shot down in front of your eyes. And that alone becomes the driving force for Crow's revenge. Simple, yet effective. But despite Crow's actions, he is also not heartless. He was the main reason why Reen was even found in the Isengard range come the start of Cold Steel 2, but more importantly, he is fully aware of what his revenge will bring about, that being war. Because of that fact, he wants to assist the Noble Alliance and end the war as quickly as he can, so as to prevent prolonged suffering. It's a sin that he is willing to shoulder so that he can get his revenge, and he thus makes the perfect rival to Reen, like two sides of the same coin. Both have tragic backgrounds, both are empathetic, but they find each other on opposite sides despite that. And even worse, come his supposed death at the climax of Cold Steel 2, it appears that Crow's life was given for nothing upon Osborne's reappearance. A tragic end for the man. With all that said, I think Crow's position as the best character of the first two games is well deserved. And that is it, guys. We finished the community ranking for Cold Steel 1 and 2. Thank you once again to everyone who voted and left their comments. I was very happy with how these videos came out. Sometime next year we'll start the voting for Cold Steel 3 and 4 maybe. Have a good one, guys, and see you again for the shareholder meeting.